Hello and welcome to our 60 Minutes podcast, Extra Minutes. My name is Dimity Clancey and joining me today is producer Anne Worthington.
Hi.
Lovely to have you. Today we're talking about childcare, which has been a huge topic here in Australia recently. And the big reason why is because lots of mums and dads and lots of horror stories that are coming out of the system. Where do we begin?
For people that study this area have been crying out for decades that there is systemic problems in the sector, and governments haven't been doing enough. That has changed with the horrific allegations that have come out in Victoria about Joshua Brown, who's alleged to have abused children in his care at a centre that is run by a company called G8 Education. And that's been the straw that broke the camel's back and has propelled governments to act.
And I think this is one of those stories that, you know, I don't know about you, Anne, but when we first started to look into this story, we first started to hear these stories about childcare, I think it was the ins and outs of the sector that, as a parent who, you know, has dealt with childcare for 10 years, I didn't really have any idea.
No.
I always walked into my centre and I thought, great, exceeding, because I had a good experience. And, you know, there are lots of people out there doing it right, but what we're learning and what we're seeing, it really gets into the nitty-gritty of how this system is run. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that's come out of this is the ins and outs of this sector. And you have to ask yourself a lot, how do operators get to stay open when they're not doing the right thing, especially by our little children?
Yeah, I think it's an eye-opener. I mean, as a parent as well, who's both my children went through the for-profit childcare system as well. I had no idea. I mean, you know, it was so tight and so hard to get your child into a centre that when they offered you a spot, it was almost like winning the lotto. It was like, great, you know. What's been an eye-opener for me doing the research into this program is this rating system, and the fact that centres are allowed to operate even if they're not meeting national quality standards. So you have collectively 10% of for-profit providers in the country that are not meeting national quality standards. They're either ranked as working towards or significant improvement required. And I find that remarkable that centres that are caring for children are allowed to open and do business when they're not meeting national quality standards. But if that's not alarming enough, the ones that are meeting national standards are doing the bare minimum. There are centres out there that are exceeding, but the bulk are meeting.
And at the end of the day, it all comes down to dollars. You know, there's huge money to be made in childcare. I mean, I think towards the end, it was almost $200 a day per child.
Well, they receive huge subsidy.
So a centre receives 70% of its running costs and then makes the dollars on top of that.
That's right. That's right.
It's extraordinary.
But I suppose it's the kind of whole concept of if you are running a business, you are driven by making profit. And how do you make profit? By cutting corners. And that might happen in staffing. The crux of this issue when things are going wrong in centres is because there are not enough eyes on children. And so that's one of the key ways that unscrupulous operators that are driven by profits over the care of children are cutting corners, which is, you know, less staff, less wages. But as a result of that, you're putting quality and safety of children at risk.
And it's extraordinary that these business owners in these for-profit centres are being propped up so much by the government. And I think as parents, that was a real eye-opener that, oh my gosh, this is actually being allowed to happen, because at the end of the day, those for-profit providers can say, well, we're staying within the rules.
Well, they are.
But it's the rules that aren't working. And that have led us to this.
I mean, can you think of any other business that would be allowed to open if it wasn't meeting standards? I mean, I can't, but you would think if there are, when it comes to children, that shouldn't be the case.
Exactly.
And the government is now naming and shaming and saying if businesses don't pick up their standards, then, you know, they will have that subsidy cut. But again, it goes back to why are they allowed to open their doors in the first place? As a parent, that is what I wasn't aware of, and that has shocked me. And you're talking about 10% of all profit providers.
And the scary thing too is that, you know, you go there. I mean, we have to go to work. I have to work. You have to work. Like, you have to go to work, and you place your child there. You actually don't know. And, you know, between 6 weeks and 6 years old that they go to, they're often too young to come home and tell you what's happened that day. And you don't. And I think that's the heartbreaking part, is that you drop your child off and you trust that they're being looked after. And, you know, even just some of the stories from parents in our story, you picture your own little child and you think, oh, what if that was, you know, my child in that situation?
I mean, in terms of why it's got to this point as well, I think it's important to note that it has been driven by demand. You know, we are now in a situation where two parents have to work. You know, that is the reality of many households. And subsidies used to be paid to providers that were, you know, not for profit. And that was traditionally how the sector was run. But as demand grew and more kids were needing care, it's allowed businesses to come into the sector.
Yeah, but that demand isn't going to go away just because these new rules have come in. So if you want to shut down 30 childcare centres who are now not meeting and it's unacceptable, what happens to the families of all those children that are in care? You know, what's the contingency plan from the government's point of view?
That is the tension that is currently existing between what the government's doing and the realities of the sector.
And the other really scary thing is, you know, as we know, our story involved Joshua Brown, who is accused of sexually abusing 8 children in a Victorian childcare centre. The Working with Children check, you know, so a Working with Children check is essentially, you know, it's meant to be your proof, it's meant to be your protection that you have been cleared, that you are safe to work with children. How have they been checked in recent years, or how haven't they been checked in recent years?
Well, there's no consistency between the states. So if you've lost your Working with Children's checks in one state, you can, you know, move to another state. So I think they're trying to, with recent announcements, kind of close that loophole.
I mean, it's that whole question, isn't it, about who is caring for your child? What is their history? I mean, a centre at the moment, a childcare centre at the moment, does not have to declare any financial or compliance history to anyone. You know, another family in our story was the Marigold family. Joseph and Annette, you know, lost their beautiful little girl Ariana in 2018. She was put to bed and not checked for 3 hours. The centre was relying solely on CCTV, and when they went in, she was unresponsive and rushed to hospital. I mean, when they enrolled Ariana into that centre, it was meeting national standards from the outside. It looked great, and as Joseph says in the story, it wasn't one of the cheapest centres as well. So what safeguard do we have as parents? You know, even if a centre appears to be doing everything right and looks good from the outside, I guess it just shows that you never know.
That centre in 2014 was rated as meeting national standards. Fast forward 4 years, Ariana is put to sleep at 9 o'clock, not checked for 3 hours, monitored only through CCTV, and is found unresponsive and rushed to hospital. Her parents very much lay the blame at the centre for, first and foremost, you know, failing to do physical checks.
Well, it's basic care, isn't it?
It would seem like it would be common sense to go in and check a child. But it was also through their digging, they have uncovered that the department, before it was given that rating in 2014 of meeting national standards, an investigator had gone into the centre and had made notes, had red flagged that the centre was using CCTV to monitor children, and had raised that concern. So they uncovered that afterwards, even after that little girl had died, and despite the department still needing to investigate into the circumstances of that, the centre was upgraded to exceeding, which goes back to what Professor Marianne Fennick at the Sydney University told us, which is you cannot rely on the system. It is irregular. You know, investigators are sometimes checking only once every 4 years. In fact, we found during our research that centres were allowed to open and had perhaps not been assessed for the first year or two of them opening. So no quality rating, no one had been in to see what they're doing. And that's, you know, that's a big chain of childcare centres, and they're booming. They've got many popping up in the last 12 months.
You know, and we should note that the owner of that centre where Ariana died has been cleared of any wrongdoing. But it came to light during this investigation that Joseph, Ariana's father, actually stopped that centre from opening up another centre within months of that little girl dying at the centre. So, you know, investigations are still happening. It's very much at the forefront of the department's mind. And yet you've got people over here, like the left hand's not talking to the right hand, about to approve a new centre for that owner.
While we're investigating what happened at the one where her child
has died. Joseph got that stopped. But that's where you just kind of look and you go, well, who's talking to who and who's running what in this system? And I guess it gives some insight into how we've landed here. But I just, you know, you just have to take it back to being a parent, and it's just shocking to learn the rules and the regulations of this system that is supposed to, you know, be protecting and caring for our little kids.
Well, there's two problems. You've got businesses that are cutting corners to make a profit, and you've got a weak and under-resourced regulator. And together, that has created this broken system that is now, you know, very much trying to be fixed by the government. The question of whether what they are announcing, and it's a continuing on of announcements that they've been making over the past weeks and going forward, but will any of that fundamentally change how the system, how the sector is currently run, or is it just, you know, something has to go wrong before
retrospectively,
before it's, you
and
know,
things like, you know, making CCTV mandatory. I mean, you only look at the CCTV when things go wrong. I mean, lots of centres have CCTV already. It hasn't been a deterrent for, you know, in a lot of ways. And you also ask the question, how long are these changes going to take? I mean, parents need comfort now. So yeah, I is it enough? Is it going to actually make people think twice? And also, how do you know, one of the big solutions for this problem is to put not-for-profit, you know, for the government to invest in this sector. Like, take your 16 billion that you're giving to subsidies to, you know, at the moment, and put it into not-for-profit centres. But how does that happen, and how does that happen quick enough for this situation?
I don't think there is a quick fix, but there needs to be a fix. And I think, you know, parents are crying out for that because, like you said, I think that the trust in this system has fundamentally been broken. But I don't know whether there is a quick fix to it. You know, you can only hope.
And I think, you know, the fact that we're talking about it is a start.
And there's, you know, there's talk about, well, you know, pay the parents the subsidies, pay, you know, whether that could be part of the answer, I don't know.
What, to stay home instead of going to work?
Well,
but
yeah.
I mean, you know what? Mums and dads want to go to work to not only earn money, but to do things for themselves as well. You know, that opens up a whole nother discussion, doesn't it?
That is the reality of the situation. But I think while ever there are centres that are allowed to open without meeting national standards, I mean, to me, that should be the number one thing, is that a centre has to meet those standards before it can open its doors and care for our children.
I mean, this is another thing. Why do parents have to get freedom of information documents to find, grieving parents at that, to find out this information? Why does a childcare centre not have to declare its former inspections or anything like that? Any history, compliance history, even if it was exceeding or working towards, or it was the greatest childcare centre to ever open. Why does the industry not have to declare that to parents? Why is the onus on parents to find that out, to know whether that's going to be a good place to send my child or not?
It's 7 years since Ariana died, and her family are still trying to find answers, and they're hoping that some of those answers will come from an upcoming coronial inquest, which, you know, has dragged out as well, them trying to get an inquest into their daughter's death. Hopefully that will provide some answers. But you're right, if they have had to fight every single step of the way to find out anything about what happened that morning when they dropped their little girl off to daycare and she never came home.
We should note that her autopsy came back as inconclusive. So they really have been left with absolutely nothing I mean, it's horrendous. And I really hope they get the answers in the coronial inquest. I hope that it does compel people like the department, people like the centre to come and actually speak up and give some context. I mean, it's awful to think that Joseph says that he and Annette have not had a single phone call from that centre since the day that Ariana passed away, when they called to say something's happened to her, quickly get to the hospital. I mean, that's atrocious. Where's the humanity in that? Where's the care? Where's the love? You know, and I know it's probably bound by legal proceedings and things like that. But if that's the kind of level of care that you're looking at, then that's ordinary, really ordinary.
And I think that's the lesson in all of this, is that you can't judge a centre by how it looks, or even its quality rating that it's been given by the regulator, because none of that really matters. If you've got a daycare business that is for profit, you have to look beyond all of that to find out if it is actually going to provide a quality service for your child, because the system that's in place that you think you should be able to trust is just, lax and open to being exploited.
And I think, Felicity, the educator who really bravely speaks in the story, she says, at the end of the day, trust your child. Childs feel and they know. And we know that. Yeah. Children are receptive. They know if they're in a bad situation. So I think that's a really good message, is to trust your child, but also as a parent, as mums, and I think we just trust your gut.
And I think the Wagga Wagga case, which we looked at in the program Angel's Paradise, I think the 3 people that we interviewed for that program really do show the 3 different sides of what is happening in the sector on a micro level. You've got the educator who, at 17 years of age, straight out of school, straight into a centre, no training, too young for a working with children check, left alone with up to 22 children, overwhelmed. Her mental health was spiralling working at that place. If things went wrong with kids, there wasn't enough people there to be, looking after them, to supervise them. And then when it did go wrong, it was, don't tell the parents because that looks like we're neglecting the children. They're too scared to speak out. And then you've got the parent who's going, well, I was so desperate for a spot. I grabbed the first one that came up, but things didn't feel right. But you've got a child that can't communicate and tell you what's going wrong. And then you've got the owner who monitored that centre through CCTV remotely from Sydney, says that everything was running fine there. Clearly it wasn't when the regulator, investigated. And it was almost like an accident waiting to happen with that centre. But it had been open for 8 years, and 2 of its reports were working towards.
And you do wonder, we spoke to John Tanios, the owner of Angel's Paradise, and you would just hate to think that that's the argument that the owner's going to be left having at the end of it, when this centre makes 23 findings against your centre, and it's kids eating food off the floor, it's people not having proper working with children checks. And when do you fall on your sword and go, okay, you know what, we need to do better by our kids?
Well, John Tanios isn't falling on his sword. He plans on fighting the Department of Education every step of the way into the findings. He thinks that he deserves a second chance, and has even re-registered his business under a new name, and believes that he is somebody that can be trusted with children. And
I'm sure it's not always the case, but that breakdown between a provider and the department just again gets to the heart and shows how this system is broken. He blatantly says that the department doesn't work with him, and the department says, well, you need to be shut down. I mean, that's the system running and caring for our kids right now. It's one example, of course, but it's happening.
It's one example, but it's, like I said, 10% of for-profit centres are not meeting national standards.
It's scary, isn't it? And I'm sure that this situation is far from over, and let's hope it gets better in the future for our kids.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And if you missed our story, you can catch it on the 60 Minutes YouTube channel and 9 Now.